welcome to you this afternoon to this webinar on reimagining urban growth, scaling nature-based solutions for climate resilient cities. This is a webinar organized by the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, and my name is Henning Nøhr. I will be the moderator during the next 1 hour sharp. I work at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs within the Department for Green Diplomacy and Climate, and we work mainly within the teams that work with water adaptation, environment, but also who are responsible for our Danish work with nature-based solutions in developing countries. The main purpose of this webinar is in fact to launch 2 UNEP-CCC's urban nature-based solution publications. There is first a short brief policy brief that is entitled Enabling Future Ready Urbanization in Fast-Growing Cities with Nature-Based Solutions. And then there's a more comprehensive report which goes into business models for financing nature-based solutions in urban climate action as a kind of knowledge resource for cities in developing countries. The webinar will try to dive into how urban NBS can be scaled effectively, overcoming existing barriers to implementation, particularly in growing cities in low and middle income countries. The UNEP Center expertise gathered through extensive knowledge sharing activities and development of these 2 key publications I just mentioned, and they will both be in the forefront of our discussions today. The 2 publications are part of the UNEP Center's growing work with urban nature-based solutions and are well placed, as I see it, in the continued project work on urban NBS and the outreach activities covering that theme. Most recently, during the COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, the center hosted and engaged in several side events, the focus of which were on how cities can address the climate crisis with urban nature-based solutions. There's also a podcast that has been launched by the center, and this podcast also underscored the opportunities at hand for climate change mitigation by doing the NBS approach, speaking on specific ways that NBS can be applied to cities and yield, for example, cooling benefits. Early last year, in 2024, the center hosted a seminar where the opportunities and challenges for scaling urban NBS in light of rapid urbanization and climate change were discussed, with the audience and participant in the panel from the city of Copenhagen, C40, Novo Nordisk, the University of Southern Denmark, and the center itself, and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs did appear at that conference. We hope that discussion will take place at this webinar will feature experts' input or insight from key actors into how we can invest into supporting cities to implement more nature-based solutions, how to overcome the barriers that are connected to applying the NBS approach. And I think that we believe that those issues are of high importance for not only for the center by itself, but also for ICLEI and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And ICLEI is the local governments for sustainability network. We hope that we can shape the discussions today, and we have a number of guiding questions that you can take in and perhaps use to shape your own questions to the panel that will come later on. We would like to discuss a little the state of pay for NBS in fast-growing cities. How can cities already work with NBS, and how can NBS support climate-ready urbanization in the future? How can cities balance short-term flood management solutions with long-term resilience strategies? A third question could be, what are the main opportunities and pressure points for scaling NBS inside cities? And the last question from our side could be that how can cities in low and middle income countries overcome the initial financial burden associated with NBS? But it's of course just issues from our side that you may have on mind, but of course you're free to put up your own questions. We'll be having 3 presenters on the panel during the day or during this hour coming, and I will just make a brief presentation of them. The first one is Julia Romero. She's in fact working at the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. She works in the impact and adaptation analysis section where she contributes to projects relating to nature-based solutions, loss and damage, and climate transparency. As a co-lead to the UNEP Center's engagement in the Danish NBS knowledge platform, she plays a vital role in establishing a community of practice across Nordic stakeholders developing NBS work in other parts of the world and mainly in developing countries. In the past, she has supported the productions of UNEP's emission gap report and co-authored a chapter on food system in 2022. Her academic backgrounds includes global environmental governance, policy analysis, tropical forest conservation in the Brazilian Amazon. Our second speaker is Ethel Mudenda. She is also connected to the UNEP Center. She works as a local consultant on nature-based solutions in Zambia. She has a background as a natural resource management specialist with a specific focus on surface and groundwater resources, management of these resources at national as well as transboundary level. She has previously worked on programs ensuring water security involving high-level efforts of the government of Zambia. She has supported local community interventions in soil and water conservation and natural regeneration measures, including but not limited to farmlands. She has supported local authorities and, for example, also the Lusaka City Council in the urban water management, developing frameworks for management of the city water cycle and governance capacity for increased sustainability of the investments. The last and the third speaker will be Daniela Rizzi. She's a senior expert for nature-based solutions at ICLEI. She's a senior expert, as mentioned, and work also with not only nature-based solutions but also biodiversity at ICLEI Europe. And she has been there for more than 15 years with a long-standing experience bridging policy, science, and practice. She is the NetworkNature project manager. She is also an expert peer reviewer to the UNEP Global Environmental Outlook 7 publication, and she is also related to the NBS working group contributing to the European standards for NBS implementation under the European Committee for Standardization. She is an advocate for nature-positive economy. She emphasizes that economic system must not only operate within planetary boundaries, but also actively contribute to nature restoration. Daniel has led NBS capacity building initiatives, including Urban by Nature, and has contributed to the high-level political processes, for example, presenting NBS as a concept to the G7 group. Based on this, I think we can start up with the exciting stuff that will come. I have a little housekeeping just up front. We have, as I said, 1 hour sharp. We have the 3 presentations, and then there will be an opportunity for you to put your questions, but that will be in our chat. We will try to bring as many of them to the table to the 3 presentators, and might be that afterwards the center would be able to answer some of the questions that have not been able to come to the table today. So, and I think then we'll try to finalize with a short conclusion and summary of some of the key findings from this seminar. But I will move on, and I will quickly leave the floor to the intervention by Julia on the main findings of the two UNEP UNEP-CCC publications. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you so much, Henning. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks for starting us off. I'm really excited to present the 2 publications that UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center is launching today. In the next slide, you can see the cover for these 2 publications. We'll also put their links on the chat, and you can access them. Henning has already discussed or briefed you on the titles of the 2 publications. One is a shorter policy brief, the other is a project report. And they're commonly talking about nature-based solutions for cities. For us, is a really exciting topic, and I think cities is a fantastic theme to look at when we're looking from a climate perspective, just because of all the adaptation and mitigation components and all of the opportunities for increasing resilience and thinking about human well-being. We know that we're about 4.4 billion people living inside cities in the world today. This number just keeps increasing. We account for over 80% of the global GDP and also are responsible for 70% of all CO2 emissions. And for me personally, I think it motivates me to look into how cities can contribute to the goal of the Paris Agreement, especially because cities are very much contributing to the climate crisis, but being severely impacted by it at the same time. So thinking about ways to overcome barriers and implement solutions on the ground is key. And for us, nature-based solutions can contribute to this effort. In the next slide, I have included the definition that UNEP is using when we're referring to nature-based solutions. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's just for you to understand basically what we're referring to when we say nature-based solutions. This definition was adopted at UNEA in 2022. That's the United Nations Environmental Assembly. And for us, in these 2 publications, we look quite a lot into how nature-based solutions can be used in cities to support and enhance climate adaptation strategies. There's a lot that nature-based solutions can contribute to when it comes to strengthening and supporting urban cooling plans, lifting flood and stormwater management projects off the ground and strengthening them as well. Also coastal protection efforts, linking it with biodiversity efforts, and many others. For us, it's also increasingly relevant to see how nature-based solutions can be used as a way to minimize the impacts of climate-induced losses and damages. Inside cities, particularly non-economic losses and damages, for example, mental health and decrease of human well-being and loss of biodiversity. We're looking into nature-based solutions as a way to address the triple planetary crisis of pollution, loss of biodiversity, and climate change. In the next slide, you have the QR code for the policy brief that you're welcome to scan and access right away. And in this publication, we've been looking a lot into cities in low and middle income countries, due to the fact that these areas are rapidly urbanizing. And these are also areas that have vulnerabilities that go beyond climate. So they were already there, socioeconomic inequalities and other types of challenges that cities in these regions face, which will be further exacerbated by the climate crisis. We're looking into Asia, Africa, and Latin America, which are at the very forefront of the urbanization today. Asia alone, according to the WMO, is warming faster than the global average. Africa is on the front lines of climate change, with 17 out of 20 cities in the region being most climate vulnerable, according to the University of Notre Dame's assessment and index. In Latin America, where I'm from São Paulo. My city is already pretty much ranked in one of the most populous cities in the world, but it's a region that is highly urbanized today, with over 80% of the region's population living inside cities. So looking into ways that challenges and barriers can be overcome in these regions, it's very important for us. In the next slide, I have condensed the key barriers and ways that we have that we're proposing that these barriers can be overcome in low and middle income cities. In this, our assessment, we've done a lot of stakeholder consultations to understand the barriers on the ground and also to map them accordingly. They're not interdependent of each other. On the contrary, they actually are very much interconnected and interdependent. So we have come to understand that there are several capacity barriers, regulatory and policy barriers, and financial barriers. In the ways that we can overcome them are very much interconnected as well in terms of solutions. And we are suggesting that local practitioners and stakeholders working inside cities try to overcome them by addressing the low level of institutional arrangement. Is usually quite fragmentalized when it comes to nature-based solutions and also climate change. So there are different people inside municipal offices working with these topics, so it doesn't facilitate a coordination on the long run. There's also a lack of coordination between what happens at the national level and what gets trickled down to the local level policy, which means that there's also an opportunity to benefit from a higher level of coordination with the country's NDCs or national adaptation plans, for example. Synergies on different types of policies where nature-based solutions could be potentially mainstreamed. For example, policies related to renewable energies or building codes. And I'm not going to go through all of them for the sake of keeping in time, but I really suggest that you read a publication where we go into a greater level of detail, barriers and solutions. But the financial barriers that we explored, they're very much connected to the report on business models, where we understand that there is an overall issue in making nature-based solutions at city levels attractive for the private sector. So it's challenging to understand the economic value, and also there are several uncertainties on how nature-based solutions will continue to yield climate adaptation results in the long run, because of course nature-based solutions are obviously part of nature and as such impacted by climate change. So their effectiveness over time can also falter. Cities at low and middle income countries may have challenges having full data and understanding of the challenges in the long run. I'll move on to the key takeaway points of the report in my next slide. Oh, actually, it is in this slide. We are suggesting that city practitioners look into adapting nature-based solutions into their urban planning by having a business model lens. Because by having this business model lens, we understand that a lot of the barriers can be overcome by having a deeper dive into what are the practical solutions at hand and how they impact the local community and how can they generate income for that region, and also understand the needs from investors and the economic benefits at hand. In my next slide, we have inserted an image from our publication where we created this business model canvas. The report itself has over a dozen of these canvases applied to different types of urban nature-based solution infrastructure, but what we're suggesting is that each of these boxes should be adapted and should be understood from the city level. So for example, having a big understanding of what is the value proposition of the nature-based solution infrastructure, who will ultimately benefit from it, what kind of data is needed to monitor the implementation of this NBS, what are the costs, the possible financial sources, etc. The business model lens for NBS project development is really relevant for practitioners to also understand how the nature-based solution will shape that area in the city, and also how can it be scaled in the long run. In my next slide, we have the bigger takeaways from the report, and we try to think of nature-based solutions not in terms of a single one-off park or a single one-off green area, but thinking at scale. And that's really important, specifically when we're talking about resilient cities and climate adaptable cities. So thinking of this bigger, wider scale is really relevant for cities that are expanding this fast. It's equally important to consider the key roles. What is needed to develop the nature-based solution project, what kind of experience is needed on the ground, where is it that capacities need to be built, and also understanding the role that local communities have. It's really important that they have a seat at the table in developing the value of the NBS infrastructure, and they're consulted throughout the project. Lastly, but one of the last points is that having a clear understanding of the costs and benefits inherent in the nature-based solution infrastructure is vital, as well as having an understanding of the trade-offs at hand. It's not that nature-based solutions can be a silver bullet and solve all of the city's issues. So understanding what can and cannot be accomplished with it and how it will work in the long run is really important. The report also talks about pivoting for innovative solutions for overcoming financial barriers. And right now, we know that cities and public offices usually pick up the check when it comes to implementing urban NBS. So making it attractive for the private sector is key, as we've discussed in the policy brief. So looking at the barriers that can be breached in this regard. And in the report, we go into detail about these types of innovative solutions, as we're calling, so public-private partnerships and sustainability bonds, equity financing and blended financing, insurance schemes. There are various modalities that could be explored. But for them to work, you also need to have the other barriers overcome, as I presented, capacity and so forth. In sum, why is this relevant for us when we focus so much, and this is a big year for national climate action with the NDCs 3.0, but it's really important that cities are factored in these national plans. We know that cities in low and middle income countries are in the front lines. We know that the finance flows for NBS is estimated at around 200 billion, but this figure is only 1/3 of what we actually need. On the other hand, finance flows for infrastructure that have a negative impact on nature is around 7 trillion per year. For us, it's really important to consider how nature-based solution can be used to reimagine an urban growth that is healthier and provides access to a fairer and safer future for cities and the planet. I would like to, in my next slide, leave you with a few extra resources where you can do a bit of a deeper dive into UNEP's existing publications on NBS. And this is just a non-exhaustive list, including the Adaptation Gap Report launched last year, which actually has findings from cities' adaptation actions and how they disclose their risks and hazards, which could be really interesting. UNEP has also launched a publication on financing NBS last year and the year before, and a recent publication was also launched on decent work on nature-based solutions, highlighting how much of an opportunity there is for employment and economic growth. I will leave you here. I think I have already used my time, but I'm really looking forward to discussing these findings with the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Very, very interesting, and very comprehensive work you're doing with urban NBS in developing countries or bigger cities. I know that I guess Ethel, you have a question perhaps to Julia, and then I would also just say that there's still a lot of room in the chat to come up with questions that we can try to bring forward to the panel. So please chip in on that. But Ethel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Henning, and thank you very much, Julia, for that informative presentation and very interesting. We really look forward to applying the content therein. But as you were presenting, I had this question with me. How can cities really balance the short-term solutions with the long-term resilience strategies and scale up this NBS? I would appreciate your feedback for that, because I think it's critical for cities such as Lusaka. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ethel. This is a really good question. And I think, first of all, when we're designing nature-based solutions and for Lusaka and other areas, I think as much as possible, we should try to consider solutions that can last. So try to stay away from solutions that will yield immediate results, but that would ultimately not hold. So having enough data to plan for a nature-based solution strategy when it comes to adaptation is really relevant. So understanding the climate challenges over a longer period of time is key, in my opinion. But as we discussed, and that's also something that the policy brief goes into detail, is really relevant to embed nature-based solutions into urban development. So cities resilient master plan or even adaptation strategies, and having nature-based solutions be interwoven into the fabric of cities' policies so that they can take hold. A lot of the issues that we understood from our consultations is that sometimes the topic of nature-based solutions can be taken quickly by a city under a political situation, but then when that changes or when there are shifts in priorities, it can be deprioritized quite quickly. But it's something else if you actually have nature-based solutions being a part of a policy framework. So I think that would help balance long-term results with long-term NBS implementation. I hope this answers more or less, but this is a really interesting question, and I would love to talk more about it later on.
Thank you very much, Julia. I think we'll move on with the next presentation, and that it, in fact, will be Ethel Mudenda that will present her consideration around interventions using NBS. So, Ethel, I'll put the floor to you now, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Allow me to indicate to the audience that the implementation of nature-based solutions in Lusaka City is still in its infancy, with much of it in the conceptual development phase, and therefore there are only scattered pilot interventions across the city. Now, Lusaka was conceived to be a green city, and therefore many of the interventions that are currently being undertaken, they are in response to it being a green city. And these have usually taken the form of urban tree planting in public spaces such as schools, hospitals, as well as along the streets. There has been also the reforestation of forest reserves that are around the city. Now, given the fact that much of the water supply for Lusaka City, approximately 60% of it comes from the groundwater, there's been deliberate efforts to also protect the groundwater recharge zones using nature-based solutions, and this is mainly by vegetating these zones. Aligned with the groundwater recharge zones is wellfield protection, and here I'm giving reference to Shaft 5 and mass media wellfields that have been envisaged to be protected through recreational eco-parks, which will consist of nature-based solutions such as water retention ponds, bioretention basins, bioswales, as well as infiltration trenches, as well as permeable paving. Now, given the foregoing, it has been realized that there is huge potential for scaling up nature-based solutions in Lusaka City. And this is because of the increased intensity, duration, but also frequency of the climatic hazards. Also, there's been a realization for long-term sustainable solutions, which nature-based solutions offer. But how can this scaling up be done? Typically, it has been identified that enhanced and strengthened stakeholder management, engagement, and coordination are key for scaling up nature-based solutions. In line with that, there is need for increased and diversified financing of nature-based solutions. However, there are predominant barriers for implementing nature-based solutions in Lusaka City. The first and critical being the lack of integrated developments across the city. This is coupled by people's negative actions as well as behaviors towards the environment. And also associated with that is the weak enforcement of environmental management regulations. All combined, these barriers have led to inertia among stakeholders, including potential stakeholders, to finance nature-based solutions. However, the barriers are not surmountable. And this is because of the projected positive impacts that may be realized by implementing nature-based solutions. And these include improved water security as well as water retention in Lusaka City. Also, it is envisaged that implementation of nature-based solutions would result in reduced heat fluxes in the city, but also reduced windstorms across the city. And therefore, the initiative by the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center to support implementation of nature-based solutions in urban cities could not have come at a better time. It is highly timely. I must also indicate to the audience that as we are having this webinar, many parts of Lusaka are actually flooded due to flash floods that have been experienced in this rainy season. And there are huge repercussions on society for that. And therefore, it is vital and cardinal that we really put our efforts together and ensure that we have these nature-based solutions in Lusaka City. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ethel, on this presentation, which I think reflects a little around the often the lack of proper planning, in fact, to support NBS in major cities, but also a little on this north-south collaboration on solutions, which I think is quite interesting. I know, Daniela, you have a question to Ethel you would like to put forward, so I'll give you the floor, please.
Thank you, Henning, and thank you for the invitation. And Ethel, thank you so much for your presentation. I would really like to ask you a question. We know about the recent context that you have been witnessing, floods, right, in the Zambian context. And so I would like to ask you, how do you assess the opportunities for using nature-based solutions as a way to counteract disaster risks that are happening? How can NBS really be contributing to disaster risk reduction?
Thank you, Danny, for that question. And indeed, the experience that we have right now in Lusaka City is a testament to the opportunities that are available from the NBS perspective that can actually help reduce the disaster risk that Lusaka City is currently facing. And I want to state that the opportunities are huge. There are so many opportunities, and they are huge even in terms of magnitude. But what we need in order to be able to gain from these opportunities is to enhance the coordination and approach towards implementation of nature-based solutions, as well as the financing, as I indicated. The opportunities for managing flooding, for example, come in the form of drainage systems. What type of drainage systems can be put up for Lusaka City? These have to be green infrastructure that can help manage the floods. But also, apart from just draining the water, what type of retention systems can we have that can hold this water that we have around? And then once the water is retained, what multiple uses of that water can be applied so that it becomes beneficial for the people, for the communities? But also, Danny, I would want to say that another opportunity that is realized, because these are huge quantities of water that we're talking about, there can be restoration of the wetlands. The wetlands have been degraded as we speak. So what NBS can we then put in place to restore those degraded wetlands so that then they can continue to function as they used to do previously. And I want to tell you, including the audience, that right now, despite facing the floods that we have right now, there's a saying that is going around among all the citizenry. They are saying it is better to have floods than to have droughts. Now, I want to ask you, why is that statement coming up from the citizenry? It's simple. It's because they are beginning to realize that there's potential that can come in from NBS to actually utilize this flood water into a positive way. If only the flood waters can be managed in a proper way, and that is by using nature-based solutions, that water can be transformed from being a disaster into something that is useful. And so really, I think the atmosphere is very heightened right now in Lusaka City. Many people are looking to how we can use NBS to turn these disasters into opportunities so that they can help socially, economically, as well as health-wise. And so I'm really excited to have had this opportunity. And what I can say to the audience is, please feel free to come on board and be a part of the solution, including yourself, Dani, into this NBS potential for Lusaka City. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you very much, Ethel, for this inspiring presentation and also the offer you gave us to be a part of the whole process around trying to move this concept more into not at least developing countries and their major cities. So I think that I will then turn on to Daniela Rizzi. She will give her presentation now, and I hope that I'm sure it will be going to be as inspiring as we just got from the two first one. And just just a note here is that please, more questions. I mean, I only have one now in my chat. It would be nice if there were more comments on some of the issues that has been discussed. But over to you, Daniela. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Henning. And I really would like to compliment what Ethel said. I really also strongly believe in the power of nature-based solutions to help us solve so many of our crises and to also do nature restoration, because it's not only about us, of course, it's also about the planet that our home here, so the ecosystems and wildlife. So yeah, so I'm happy to share with you today a bit from a report that I had the pleasure to work with. It was about EU and LAC. So we covered the European landscape of nature-based solutions and the Latin American Caribbean landscape of nature-based solutions to understand what they're working on, the different topics and the strengths and the policy levers. So yeah, this is the report. So if you have your phones there, you can screen the QR code, and I'm going to dive into it a little bit, like Julia said, for the reports that she's launching today from UNEP-CCC. And Julia, thanks for these reports. We will make sure to study them and read them and make connections with the outputs. So yeah, just a little bit of story background. This report builds on a political momentum from what we call the ICLEI summit. It happened in 2023, and we had also a senior officials meeting in November that year, and then there was a policy dialogue that happened in Brussels last June. And in that dialogue, we actually had everything together. We counted 94 representatives from 14 Latin American countries, 12 member states of the European Union, but we also had UK representatives and other key stakeholders. And the idea of this dialogue was to develop a shared vision for nature-based solutions, set priorities, but of course, strengthen cooperation between EU and LAC. So we worked with this report, and the structure of the report was to come in with an introduction, of course, understanding the situation, the status quo in these different regions, and in terms of what are the strengths there, what is maybe missing. And then we dived in policy, in funding and knowledge exchange in chapter 2, and we did really like an overview of policy uptake in both of the regions. We tried to dive into understanding the different funding and financing mechanisms to support nature-based solutions. So not only funding, but also financing. And then we tried to understand, what can be there, the bottom-up initiatives that are also happening, because of course nature-based solutions work a lot with local communities as well. So it's not only a push that is coming from governments and from policymakers, but it's also a push that we see that is coming from societies and communities. And then in chapter 3, we had the pleasure to dive into different NBS cases. So we focused on the different ecosystems, so agricultural ecosystems, the forest ecosystem, but we also dived into freshwater and riverine, and then marine and coastal. That was the 4th type. And then the 5th type was really focusing on urban areas, the urban ecosystems. And we tried to analyze there the different policy instruments, and we chose from EU and from LAC for each of these ecosystems a good practice in terms of policy. So you can check the report, and you're going to find these NBS cases there. But I would say that the most important part of this report was really focusing on cooperation pathways, because we really wanted to see, okay, what are the entry points for us to actually upscale nature-based solutions and make sure that NBS are actually featuring in plans, and also in terms of, how can we make sure that everything that is happening in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation, that we also have the chance to feature nature-based solutions in there. And then we actually analyzed the entry points in terms of joint research, in terms of knowledge sharing, but also policy integration. And I am going to show here the main pathways that we have explored in the report. So we saw that actually addressing policy and regulatory barriers is as important as raising our profiles in terms of data. And collecting what is out there in terms of monitoring and sharing the monitoring outputs. We also have seen that with collaboration pathways between EU and LAC, we can actually unlock new funding and financing mechanisms. So it is very important to have this conversation. We all know that the biodiversity hotspots are in the global south. So this conversation cannot happen without a very, very protagonist voice of the global south. And of course, the engagement of communities is very important in that sense. We know how important communities are in the global south, and how they're taking care of indigenous communities, but also local communities and Afro-descendants communities are taking care of biodiversity hotspots, and we want to enhance. So I also did this mini table, and I probably cannot speak too much anymore so that we have time to discuss and have a conversation. But we have seen some that the EU region has been leading in terms of, they have this huge framework of the EU Green Deal. So that's a framework where you can pack a lot of policy frameworks under it. So they did it for the climate adaptation strategy for the EU. They also have there the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030, and now with the approval of the Nature Restoration Regulation. So these policy frameworks help a lot to unlock financing lines and funding schemes. But then we have seen seen that the LAC region has actually been doing a lot in terms of how can traditional and local knowledge contribute to this whole conversation. And there, they have a lot to teach, actually, the whole world, right? So we have to make sure that this knowledge is making into discussions. We also have seen a lot of very, very creative financing models coming from the Global South in LAC, the LAC region. And yeah, so I'll stop here so that I don't go over the minutes too much, and then we can engage in a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I think, again, it's interesting, this focus on the importance of the governance structure, this question about that NBS can bring solutions in scale, which is also a very important point, but also this question about various partners that in fact can mutually support each other on trying to build the knowledge and the experience to move on the NBS in urban areas. And you mentioned on the quite comprehensive work done by EU, but also other actors doing very important work. I know that, Julia, you have a question that you would like to put to our presenter.
Yes, thanks, Henning, and thanks, Danny, for the presentation. What you mentioned, or just echoing what Henning just said on the cooperation pathways, is really interesting, and that's something also that the publications we worked on underscored quite a lot. So using collaborations across cities with similar climate stressors and socioeconomic contexts is really key in terms of building capacity. So this is a really exciting point, and we know that there's a lot of organizations supporting cities so that they can have this learning environment and joint capacity being built. But my question actually to you, I thought it would be nice to know a little bit more about the policy levers you pulled. You mentioned some examples in Latin America and in the EU, but what do you think are successful policy levers observed in the two regions? And then another one, just because we're both from Brazil, I think it would be interesting to know what the LAC region can maybe teach the rest of the world, or maybe can support the rest of the world in terms of knowledge, if you've come across that in your research. But thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for the questions. I think I'll start with the last one, making a little bit of bridge to the presentation. I think the Latin America and the Caribbean, they have really a lot to teach, not only in terms of traditional and ancestral knowledge and actually decolonizing the whole discourse around nature-based solutions, but also in terms of how creative LAC is in terms of how you can engage communities on the ground. Why am I saying this? I think the whole topic around informality, right, where you have really huge portions of the population living in areas that are quite sensitive from an ecological point of view. I think that the LAC countries had to learn how to establish, a dialogue with these people, because you cannot, a lot of times you can remove maybe one population from an area of risk, but if you're talking about 1 million, 2 million, 3 million people in such areas, the removal, the shift of these populations to another place is actually almost impossible. So in that sense, I think that LAC has really like some examples. We even see it in Sao Paulo, where you had to start a dialogue with these communities, and they actually have been showing that there are very, very nature-based ways for them to interact with their local context, right? So I think that is something that, and many favelas and many also informal settlements, they have also started many new programs how to use nature-based solutions. The Brazilian government is, for example, paying now for a lot of capacity building in that field, and we have seen a lot of new reports coming out of, you know, how nature-based solutions can help in informal settlements for more safety and for the ecosystems, but also for people. Yeah, so I think that's a big lesson learned. And the second question is diving into a bit the policy levers that we have seen in our research. There are many different fields that we have actually dived into, but I can say for sure that payment for ecosystem services is something that the LAC region does very, very well. So there are really, really interesting examples from Costa Rica, how they have, you know, put up models in that sense to actually protect and restore nature. Also, Brazil has many examples of how the payment for ecosystem service has changed completely the way people interact with the terrain. So I would say that's a big one for LAC. And for maybe just one example from Europe, I would say that if you get the green roof strategies that were developed by Hamburg, but also by Basel in Switzerland, these are cities that have been really like teaching the rest of the world how to upscale a sturdy green roof strategy. And you know, the way they have put that in their policy, but also make sure that private owners can get some advantages from, you know, designing with green roofs. They really made it clear that more than half of the city has green roofs. So I think this is something that we could also spread throughout other cities, and the cities can learn from one another how to bring such upscaling of results. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Daniela. And I think that we will move to, we have a little time left, so we'll move to have some of the questions from the audience, and perhaps we can make some quick answers just to reach or to be able to answer most of them. Is Ethel on? Ethel, are you on the, could you put your, yeah, perfect. Okay, I have a question here. So how would you see national and local governments to make the best out of NBS? Is there anyone having a short answer to that question? Julia?
Thanks, Henning. I think this is a really interesting question, and that's something that us working with nature-based solutions, I think it's important that we consider how to address the national and local implementation of urban nature-based solutions, because of course a lot of what happens on the ground is usually mirrored by the policies that have made it to the top. And you know, it makes it much easier to implement nature-based solutions at the local level once you already have a policy that has been sedimented at the national level. And as I was saying briefly in the presentation, this is a really big year for us because of the NDCs coming out. So it leaves a lot of room for including nature-based solutions or an urban content on the NDCs. And I think that not just the NDCs, but national adaptation plans and national biodiversity strategies and action plans, what we call NBSEPs, they're really good entry point for nature-based solutions to be interwoven, and that's on an urban content, but also beyond. There was a report that came out last year by UN Habitat, and I think that was really interesting because they analyzed the NDCs as of June 2024, and up until then, about half of the NDCs that they studied had a mention of urban adaptation and mitigation, and 40% of the NDCs that they looked included climate hazards, but didn't go too much into detail. So I think it highlights a huge opportunity for a country's ambition at the national level to include considerations at the local level. I don't know if this answers the question or if my colleagues want to complement, but yeah, I'll stop here.
I think that was fine. I think I'll move on to the next one, and perhaps I can assign that to you, Ethel. How do you see the role of educational campaigns on NBS and the engagement of local communities from your point of view, Ethel?
So in terms of educational campaigns, I think they are very, very critical, especially for cities such as Lusaka. As I said, one of the predominant barriers is the lack of awareness by the communities to say their actions actually are detrimental to the environment. And so having these educational campaigns, making sure that communities are aware of the NBS, as well as being part of actually implementing these solutions is very, very critical. I would say that it's among one of the top things that has to be done in cities such as Lusaka to make sure that everyone is brought on board. Also, not only for the local communities, but even all the other stakeholders whose main business is not really nature-based solutions, those that are into production, such as companies that produce all these different goods for the people, they all need to be brought on board. And so just to reiterate that we really have to up our game where educational campaigns are concerned. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And one for you, Daniela. What accountability measures are in place or should be in place when implementing nature-based solutions?
Yeah, that's such a hard question. It's the heart of the matter, right? Because if we're doing nature-based solutions, we have to make sure that the quality is right. Otherwise, we're going into greenwashing, right? If people do something that doesn't help biodiversity at all, and they call it NBS, that's greenwashing. So I would say that the most important thing is that we make sure that NBS is enhancing biodiversity. That's always like I tell people, if you're not sure if what you're delivering is really nature-based solutions, you have to ask yourself, are you enhancing biodiversity? Is there any biodiversity net gain, right? That's very important. But there are metrics that are also coming out. They are not yet, I would say, global. So there is the IUCN global standard. So you can do a self-assessment looking at the IUCN global standard, but you don't really have metrics there. It's more like a set of guidelines for you to check if your solution is an NBS or not. But in terms of really metrics, there are some initiatives. So we have in Europe, we worked with the Task Force 2 on nature-based solutions from the European Commission with a book that is like 500 pages long, and there you have indicators set for different topics. And we have some of them are like what we say mandatory, and the other ones are, facultative, but that's it. It's not a metric that is, everywhere. It's an initial point that these projects started to put up these indicators together to measure the impact. But we will need, and I really like to hear from Julia and Ethel, and I know that the time is very short, but we might need in the very near future, Henning, really metrics that are recognized, globally, really, so that also we can make sure that the financing markets that are starting to enter the arena, that they are not greenwashing, and so big players. BlackRock just told, I think it was the 25th of January, that they said that nature is now an asset class. So we're entering a terrain that we really need metrics and indicators to make sure that we have quality.
Julia, you point your finger.
Yes, I don't know how to raise my hand in this. Oh, yeah, in this platform. But I just wanted to compliment what Danny said, because greenwashing is, of course, a huge issue, and also something that we need to consider as practitioners, because otherwise the people who ultimately the nature-based solution infrastructure is supposed to benefit will not benefit from it. So it creates more issues and creates more inequality, specifically when we're looking into low and middle income cities. But my point is that also the absence of such metrics and the absence of proper standards for nature-based solutions can lead to maladaptation. So when we're talking about nature-based solutions that's supposed to build resilience, they can end up doing quite the opposite. So it's really, I couldn't agree with that anymore. I think it's really where the problem lies, and it's important that we are mindful of these standards and apply them carefully to ensure that what we're trying to achieve with the infrastructure actually is achieved, and that all the components of the project end up yielding positive results for human well-being, for biodiversity, for the environment, and also for climate. So I just wanted to echo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we are at the end. I'm sorry about that. We could have spent more time discussing these issues. There are other good questions, in fact, in the chat, but I think we have to round up this webinar on urban NBS. And I think that just a few takeaways from my side would be that, first of all, that things are really progressing. I mean, there's really happening a lot on trying to apply this. I think people are also cautious about the pitfalls, the challenges that they're there, but also not at least the opportunities, in fact, to make solutions that are doable, that in fact are also from a financial point of view really interesting. And then I think the concept of NBS gives us a possibility to discuss scale in our interventions. It gives us a possibility to get the right governance in place, the right dialogue between different stakeholders to ensure that we get into this. You can never avoid doing development wherever you are, the trade-offs, but to do that in an informed basis in a way where it gets in the end also accountable what kind of solutions we are choosing and who are the responsible partners. So I think that with these very few just takeaways, I would like to thank everyone for participating today, and also again thanks a lot for the questions coming in, and not at least thanks to the three presenters on giving us a very, very nice insight into all the things that are in fact happening on urban nature-based solutions. Thanks a lot.